Picture this: you wake up before dawn, pull on your work clothes, and head out the door to start your shift as a professional human alarm clock. That's right, your job is to roam the streets, banging on doors with a long stick to rouse sleepy townsfolk for the day ahead. Or maybe your career involves spending your days knee-deep in a well. Let's just say the less glamorous side of castle maintenance. These weren't the punchlines of some medieval joke. They were real, essential jobs that kept entire societies functioning. Welcome to the wonderfully weird world of strange medieval occupations, where the titles might make you laugh, but the impact was no laughing matter. The medieval period was a time of staggering innovation and social complexity, but we often forget just how many bizarre yet crucial roles existed behind the scenes. Think about it: without the Gong farmer who braved the depths of castle cesspits to remove waste, entire cities would have succumbed to disease. Without the ale conner who tested beer quality by sitting in puddles of it, yes, really, trade and tavern culture might have collapsed. These jobs weren't just oddities, they were the unsung gears that turned the machinery of daily life, ensuring everything from public health to royal entertainment ran smoothly. So why does this matter to you? Because these professions are more than just historical curiosities. They're windows into how societies adapt, solve problems, and even create traditions that linger today. That whipping boy who took punishments for a misbehaving prince, he's the ancestor of modern ideas about accountability and education. The court jester, with his sharp wit and immunity to punishment, laid groundwork for free speech in some ways. Over the next few minutes, we'll uncover 26 of these extraordinary roles, each with its own surprising legacy. Get ready to meet the medieval workforce you never knew existed, and discover how their stories still resonate in ways you'd never expect. Imagine trudging through the dark streets of a medieval town long after curfew, armed with nothing but a shovel, a bucket, and a strong stomach. This was the nightly routine of the Gong farmer, the unsung sanitation worker who kept entire communities from drowning in their own waste. While kings and knights dominate history books, it was these laborers who literally cleared the way for civilization to thrive. Their job, to manually empty the reeking cesspits beneath castles and homes, a task so vile that many towns banned them from working daylight hours to spare the public from the sight and smell. But here's what might surprise you: Gong farmers weren't downtrodden paupers. In fact, they commanded impressive wages, sometimes earning more than skilled craftsmen. Why? Because no one else was willing to do what they did, and everyone from the lowest serf to the highest lord depended on their work. Towns even issued them special permits to operate after dark, a medieval version of hazard pay for a job that risked everything from methane explosions to deadly infections. The legacy of these forgotten workers runs deeper than you might think. Their grueling labor laid the foundation for modern public health systems. Before germ theory, before plumbing, Gong farmers were the first line of defense against epidemics. When the Black Death ravaged Europe, it was often communities with organized waste removal, however primitive, that fared better. So next time you flush a toilet or walk down a clean city street, spare a thought for the medieval laborers who proved that civilization isn't built on grandeur alone, but on the willingness to do what others won't. Now picture being a child in the royal court, standing helplessly as your best friend is beaten, not for his own mistakes, but for yours. This was the grim reality for whipping boys, one of history's most unsettling professions. While princes enjoyed divine right and privilege, their education came with a dark twist. No one was allowed to strike royalty, not even for discipline. So when a young heir misbehaved or failed his lessons, an appointed companion, often a noble-born playmate, would endure the lash in his place. The logic behind this practice reveals the medieval mind at its most paradoxical. Royals believed that princes and their whipping boys shared a sacred bond, almost like spiritual twins. By witnessing his friend's pain, the prince would theoretically learn remorse and self-correction. In one infamous case, King Charles I of England was so traumatized by his whipping boy's suffering that he reportedly became a model student overnight. But here's what's rarely acknowledged. These boys weren't just human punching bags. Many were educated alongside princes, forming genuine friendships that made the punishment even more psychologically complex. What's truly startling is how this practice echoes in modern education. While we've thankfully abandoned corporal punishment, the idea of teaching through shared consequences persists. Think of group projects where one slacking student costs the whole team, or accountability partners in workplaces today. The whipping boy system also exposed the hypocrisy of medieval nobility, preaching about honor and virtue while outsourcing violence to children. Yet it inadvertently created some of history's most loyal advisors. Several whipping boys grew up to become trusted confidants to kings, their early suffering forging unshakable bonds. This bizarre role forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about power, empathy, and how societies choose to mold their leaders. Next time you hear someone say, "Spare the rod, spoil the child," remember the whipping boys and be grateful we've found better ways to teach responsibility. Ever wondered how medieval drinkers knew their ale wasn't watered down or laced with cheap sweeteners? Enter the ale conner, a profession that combined the skills of a food inspector with the absurdity of a slapstick comedy routine. Appointed by local courts, these officials had one critical task: to ensure the beer sold in taverns met strict quality standards. But their method, well, let's just say it involved more sitting than sipping. Picture this: an ale conner strolls into a bustling tavern, orders a fresh brew, and promptly pours it onto a wooden bench. Then, without hesitation, he plops down right into the puddle and waits. If his leather breeches stuck to the seat when he stood up, trouble was brewing in more ways than one. Sticky residue meant dishonest brewers had loaded their ale with honey or molasses to mask poor quality or watered-down batches. But if his pants lifted cleanly, that was the golden standard, a pure, unadulterated beer worthy of the king's subjects. What sounds like a bizarre party trick was actually a stroke of medieval ingenuity. Sugar additives weren't just a cheat, they could make spoiled beer palatable, hiding dangerous bacteria. Ale conners were the last line of defense against food poisoning in an era before refrigeration or sanitation laws. And their role went beyond sticky pants. They checked measures to prevent short pours, tested alcohol strength by observing how quickly it evaporated from their hands, and even inspected brewing equipment for cleanliness. Here's the twist: ale conners weren't just random volunteers. They were often respected community members, sometimes even former brewers themselves, with a deep understanding of the craft. Their judgments could ruin a brewer's reputation or save it, making them both feared and revered. In London, the position was so prestigious that new ale conners were sworn in with an elaborate ceremony, complete with oaths and symbolic garb. The legacy of these quirky inspectors lives on today. Modern food safety laws owe a debt to their uncompromising standards, and the tradition of third-party quality control, think sommeliers or coffee graders, echoes their work. Next time you enjoy a pint of craft beer, take a moment to appreciate the ale conners. Their sticky, soggy dedication ensured that even in the Middle Ages, you could trust your tankard. Deep in the murky marshes of medieval Europe, A figure moved silently through waist-high water, legs bare and arms outstretched, not to catch fish or gather reeds, but to become a living bait for one of medicine's most peculiar tools. The leech collector's job was as simple as it was stomach-churning. Lure hundreds of slimy, bloodthirsty creatures onto their own skin, then carefully peel them off to supply apothecaries and barber surgeons. These weren't just random swamp dwellers. They were highly sought-after medical equipment, believed to cure everything from fevers to melancholy by rebalancing the body's humors. What made this profession so vital? Bloodletting was the aspirin of the Middle Ages, a universal remedy prescribed for nearly every ailment. Physicians followed elaborate charts showing which veins to open based on the patient's zodiac sign or symptoms. But leeches offered a precision that crude knives couldn't match. Their saliva contained natural anticoagulants and anesthetics, making them the perfect living lancets. A skilled leech collector knew exactly where to wade to find the most effective species, often risking infections or leeches burrowing into nostrils and other inconvenient places. The real shock isn't that this practice existed, it's how sophisticated it became. Medieval hospitals maintained leech nurseries, and collectors developed techniques to farm them by soaking sponges in blood as bait. Certain varieties, like the Hungarian green leech, fetched premium prices for their supposedly superior healing properties. Even royalty relied on them. Records show King Louis XI of France imported leeches by the thousands for his personal physicians. Here's the twist: modern medicine is rediscovering their value. Today's surgeons use lab-grown leeches to restore circulation in reattached limbs, and their enzymes inspire new blood-thinning drugs. So while we laugh at medieval doctors for their bloodletting obsession, they weren't entirely wrong, just ahead of their time in harnessing nature's oddest pharmacists. The next time you shudder at the thought of a leech, remember the collectors who braved swamps so others could heal. Their legacy pulses on, quite literally, in the veins of medical history. Step into a medieval textile workshop, and you'd be hit by two things immediately: the eye-watering stench of stale urine and the rhythmic sloshing of bare feet churning vats of wool. This was the domain of the fuller, the unsung hero who transformed rough, greasy fleece into the soft, luxurious fabrics nobles and merchants craved. Their secret ingredient, human urine, collected daily from taverns and public chambers, then left to ferment until its ammonia content reached peak cleaning power. Far from being crude or unsanitary, this process was chemistry in action. When fullers trod their cloth-filled vats, a practice called walking or tucking, the ammonia broke down lanolin and dirt while the friction felted fibers together, creating thicker, more durable material. The best fullers developed an almost artistic touch, knowing exactly how long to tread different wool types. Some workshops even employed children for finer fabrics, their lighter steps preventing damage to delicate threads. What's fascinating is how this maligned trade shaped entire economies. Towns with skilled fullers became textile powerhouses, think medieval versions of Milan or Paris. In England, the city of Beverley grew wealthy enough to build a massive cathedral thanks to its Fullers' Guild. The job carried surprising prestige too. Master fullers often served as town officials, and their guilds enforced strict quality controls that foreshadowed modern manufacturing standards. But the fuller's legacy goes beyond fabric. Their ammonia-based methods were early examples of industrial recycling, turning waste into something valuable centuries before the concept became trendy. Modern eco-friendly detergents still use similar chemistry minus the urine, though some high-end denim brands have controversially revived the practice for authentic vintage washes. Next time you pull on a cozy wool sweater, remember the fullers. Their soggy, stinky labor proved that sometimes progress smells worse before it smells better. Before the first clash of swords or thunder of hooves, a knight's survival hinged on a ritual more intricate than any dance, the meticulous process of being dressed for battle by his arming squire. This wasn't just help with wardrobe, it was a life-or-death ballet of straps, buckles, and precision timing. Imagine a teenager, barely old enough to grow a beard, tightening the final rivet on a knight's breastplate, knowing that one loose hinge could mean a spear finding its mark. These squires trained for a decade or more, memorizing every curve of their master's armor like the lines of their own face. The layers weren't just about protection, they were a wearable engineering puzzle. First came the quilted gambeson, a padded jacket thick enough to absorb blows but breathable enough to prevent heatstroke. Then the mail hauberk, its thousands of interlocking rings requiring squires to lift with their legs, not their backs, a lesson many learned the hard way. Finally, the plate armor, each piece polished to a mirror shine to intimidate foes and deflect sunlight. But the real test came in the details. Did the sabaton strap tight enough to avoid tripping? Were the gauntlets flexible for sword grips? A seasoned squire could spot a misaligned cuirass from across the armory, sensing the danger before the knight even mounted his horse. What's astonishing is how these young men doubled as medieval combat tech support. During battles, squires lurked just behind the front lines with spare weapons, tools, and the encyclopedic knowledge to perform field repairs. Historical accounts describe them hammering out dents in visors mid-siege or splicing broken mail links with makeshift pliers. At Agincourt, squires reportedly kept knights fighting by rigging shattered armor with leather strips and prayer. Their work blurred the line between valet and vital crew chief, a far cry from the glorified errand boys populating Hollywood films. The squire's legacy lives on in unexpected places. Modern military aids still echo their role, ensuring a soldier's gear is mission-ready. Even astronauts rely on teams who, like squires, perfect the art of suiting up under pressure. So next time you see a knight in shining armor on screen, remember the real hero might have been the kid who made sure that armor actually worked. Their forgotten expertise proves that behind every legendary warrior stands someone who knows how to tighten the straps. Now picture a scene straight out of a medieval nightmare, a figure draped head to toe in wax-stiffened fabric, wading into plague-stricken homes while holding a long wooden rod to keep victims at bay. This was the plague doctor, part physician, part psychological terror, whose bird-like mask and ominous presence became symbols of both hope and horror during history's deadliest pandemics. But beneath the eerie costume lay a surprising mix of proto-science and desperate innovation that reshaped medicine forever. Their infamous beaked masks weren't just for show. They were early attempts at personal protective equipment, stuffed with aromatic herbs believed to purify bad air. The long waxed coats, a barrier against miasma, the invisible poison thought to spread disease. While their methods seem barbaric today, like bleeding patients or applying leeches to buboes, their meticulous record-keeping provided the first systematic data on contagion patterns. Some even pioneered quarantine protocols, isolating the sick decades before germ theory explained why it worked. Here's the twist: many plague doctors were second-rate physicians or young trainees risking their lives for double pay. Others were outright frauds peddling miracle cures, yet their failures spurred real progress. Their logs helped later scientists trace transmission routes, and their containment measures laid groundwork for modern epidemiology. That haunting bird mask, its legacy lingers in today's hazmat suits and N95 respirators, proof that even history's darkest experiments can light the way forward. In the flickering candlelight of a medieval wake, a hush would fall as a gaunt stranger entered the Sin Eater. the one person in the village both reviled and desperately needed. His ritual was deceptively simple: a loaf of bread placed on the chest of the deceased, a pinch of salt, and whispered words that sent shivers down every witness's spine. As he consumed these offerings, families believed their loved one's sins transferred into his soul, granting the dead passage to heaven while damning the living to bear their guilt. This wasn't folklore, it was a sacred transaction, equal parts spiritual comfort and social sacrifice. What's chilling isn't just the practice itself, but who these sin-eaters really were. Often impoverished outcasts, criminals, beggars, or those with physical deformities, they were paid in coins or meals to take on moral filth others feared to touch. Records from 17th century Wales describe sin-eaters banned from entering churches or touching children, yet summoned without fail when death came knocking. Their existence exposed a paradox: communities that shunned them in life relied on them for salvation in death. The Church's fury only deepened the mystery. Though clergy denounced sin-eaters as heretics, the practice persisted for centuries, especially in remote regions where ancient beliefs mingled with Christianity. Some families even staged secret midnight ceremonies, hiding their actions from priests but trusting in the ritual's power. The sin-eater's bread wasn't just food, it was a tangible symbol of grace, an edible absolution when official forgiveness failed. Here's what lingers in the modern imagination: the haunting idea that guilt could be transferred like a physical object. Today, we see echoes of this in psychology's concept of collective trauma, or in cultures where ancestors' misdeeds are believed to shape descendants' fates. The sin-eater's legacy challenges our notions of justice and sacrifice. How far would you go to free someone you love from their past? Their story reminds us that redemption often comes at a price, and sometimes the price taker wears the mask of a villain. Before smartphones or even printing presses, breaking news traveled at the speed of a single human voice echoing across cobblestone streets. The town crier wasn't just a messenger, he was a living, breathing institution, the medieval equivalent of a 24-hour news network, emergency alert system, and government press secretary rolled into one. Clad in a brightly colored coat and often wearing a bell-adorned hat, his arrival sent townsfolk scurrying from shops and homes, knowing his words could mean anything from a royal decree to a sudden tax hike. What set these criers apart wasn't just their lung power, it was their legal authority. Unlike modern journalists, they operated with the full weight of the law behind them. Interrupting a proclamation could land you in the stocks, while spreading false rumors in their name sometimes carried penalties as severe as losing an ear. Their iconic oyez, Old French for hear ye, wasn't a polite request but a command backed by the threat of fines or worse. In an age before widespread literacy, their voices were the glue holding communities together, transmitting everything from battle victories to bread prices with equal gravity. The job demanded more than a loud voice. Criers memorized lengthy edicts verbatim, often in multiple languages for border towns. They carried official seals to prove authenticity and knew which taverns or market squares would maximize their audience. Some even developed signature styles, melodic cadences for joyful news, somber tones for tragedies that became as recognizable as modern news jingles. London's criers were so vital they received special protection under Edward III's reign, classified as necessary officers alongside judges and sheriffs. But here's the twist: these human newswires laid groundwork for modern information ethics. Many towns required criers to remain politically neutral, punishing those who altered messages to suit local biases, an early form of fact-checking. Their role as truth-tellers became so sacred that harming a crier was considered an attack on the crown itself. Today, their legacy lives on in town hall meetings, public address systems, even the breaking news banners flashing across our screens. The next time you refresh a news feed, remember the criers who proved that in a world drowning in information, trust will always be the most valuable currency. The streets of a plague-ridden medieval town held no creature more feared than the humble rat, and no man more essential than the rat-catcher, while kings and clergy debated divine wrath as the cause of the Black Death. These grimy, often toothless professionals understood the real enemy, swarms of disease carrying rodents that could doom a city overnight. Armed with terriers bred for speed and ferocity, iron traps smeared with rancid bacon fat, and an uncanny ability to mimic rodent mating calls on wooden pipes, they waged a daily war against history's deadliest biological weapon. What set master rat catchers apart wasn't just their tools, it was their intimate knowledge of vermin behavior. The best could track infestations like detectives, spotting subtle signs like gnaw marks on barrel lids or greasy rat runs along walls. Some developed bizarre but effective tricks, like hanging a live owl near traps to panic rats into fleeing toward waiting jaws. In cities like London, where outbreaks meant certain death, elite catchers formed guilds with secret techniques passed down through generations. Their contracts often included performance clauses, payment only for every 100 rodents caught, proving how seriously towns took their work. The stakes couldn't have been higher. When the Black Death hit Marseille in 1347, records show neighborhoods with active rat catchers suffered half the mortality rate of others. In Prague, one catcher's journal boasted of clearing over 3,000 rats from a single granary during an outbreak, likely saving hundreds from infection. But their success came at a cost. Many developed rat catcher's lung from inhaling droppings, while others fell prey to the very plagues they fought when bitten by infected fleas. Here's the twist: these maligned laborers pioneered concepts we now consider modern. Their practice of burning corpses and disinfecting nests with vinegar foreshadowed germ theory by centuries. Some even kept detailed logs of infestation patterns, creating early disease maps that helped predict outbreaks. Today's pest control technicians owe their methods to these medieval innovators, right down to the ultrasonic devices that echo their rodent-charming pipes. So next time you see a mouse trap or hear about disease surveillance, remember the rat catchers. Their dirty, dangerous work proved that sometimes heroes don't wear shining armor. They carry rusty cages and know how to whistle a rat to its doom. Picture a medieval village at dawn where the morning mist rolls over fields of barley and wheat, and one man stands guard over this fragile bounty. The Hayward wasn't just a farmer with a fancy title. He was the law when it came to protecting the community's lifeblood, its crops. Armed with a horn slung across his shoulder and a voice that could carry across 3 fields, this livestock sheriff patrolled the boundaries between order and chaos, where a single stray cow could mean starvation come winter. His duties went far beyond shooing away wandering animals. The Hayward kept meticulous records of grazing rights, knowing which villagers' sheep were allowed on which strips of common land. When disputes erupted like a neighbor's pigs rooting up another's turnips, he acted as judge and jury, weighing evidence with the gravity of a royal magistrate. Some Haywards even carried notched sticks to tally damages, settling debts in eggs or cheese when coins were scarce. In an era before police forces, his authority was absolute. Resisting a Hayward's ruling could land you in the stocks or worse. What's fascinating is how this job blurred the line between practicality and symbolism. The Hayward's horn wasn't just a tool, it was a badge of office, its distinctive blast signaling everything from stray cattle to approaching bandits. Many villages held annual ceremonies where new Haywards swore oaths on Bibles or even plowshares, pledging to enforce the law of the field without favor. The position was so vital that, like the blacksmith or miller, the Hayward often received payment in kind, a portion of the very harvests he protected. The legacy of these agrarian enforcers lives on in surprising ways. Modern park rangers and agricultural inspectors echo their dual role as protectors and mediators. Even the humble scarecrow owes its existence to their watchful ethos, and next time you meet someone with the surname Hayward, you're shaking hands with the descendant of a medieval peacekeeper, one who proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a sword, but a keen eye and a loud horn. Their story reminds us that civilization begins not in castles or courts, but in the quiet vigilance over shared bread. In the shadowy corners of medieval town squares, a grotesque sight might greet you: a woman, her face encased in an iron cage not unlike a twisted parody of a knight's helm, her tongue pinned down by a spiked plate. This was the Scold's bridle, a punishment reserved almost exclusively for women whose words were deemed too sharp, too loud, or too disruptive to the fragile peace of male-dominated society. Far from being a rare horror, records show these devices were commonplace in England and Scotland, their very existence exposing the era's deep anxieties about female speech and social control. What made the bridle so chilling wasn't just its physical cruelty, though the iron muzzle often cut into the skin and made breathing agonizing, but its psychological theater. Victims were paraded through streets or tied to market crosses, transforming punishment into a public spectacle. The design varied by region. Some bridles included bells to draw more attention, while others had mouthpieces engraved with biting verses like, "The gossip's tongue at last is still." But the message was universal. A woman's voice, unrestrained, was dangerous enough to warrant treating her like a rabid animal. Beneath the obvious misogyny lay a more complex story about power. Church sermons from the period reveal that scolding was often code for women challenging unfair laws or abusive husbands. In one notorious case from 16th century Chester, a widow was bridled after publicly accusing a wealthy merchant of cheating her, a crime that conveniently silenced her testimony. Towns even rented out bridles like library books, with ledgers showing fees paid for their use. The practice wasn't just about punishment, it was a financial industry built on gendered fear. Yet resistance flickered in unexpected ways. Some bridled women reportedly bit down on the tongue plate until it bent, rendering the device useless. Others turned their processions into impromptu protests, gesturing wildly to mock their captors. In Scotland, where the branks often included a neck chain, legends tell of women who rattled them like war drums as they walked. These acts of defiance, small as they were, hint at an untold history of pushback against silencing. The Scold's bridle's legacy lingers in ways we rarely acknowledge. Modern phrases like "bridle your tongue" or "hold your peace" carry echoes of its control. Even today, women who speak forcefully risk labels like shrill or nagging, linguistic cousins to that iron muzzle. But here's the twist. Museums now display these devices not as warnings, but as reminders of how far we've come and how far we still have to go. The next time someone dismisses a woman's voice as too loud, remember the bridle and how desperately some once fought to keep it locked away. The moonlit churchyard should have been silent, but on certain nights, the scraping of shovels and muffled curses betrayed the presence of history's most controversial medical collaborators, the Resurrectionists. These weren't ordinary grave robbers after jewelry or keepsakes. They were precision workers supplying a burgeoning scientific revolution with its most vital and illegal resource. Fresh human corpses, at a time when only executed criminals could legally be dissected, medical schools across Europe faced a dire shortage of cadavers. Enter the Resurrectionists, who turned graveyards into black market anatomy labs under cover of darkness. Their methods were as ingenious as they were gruesome. Teams worked with near-surgical efficiency, using wooden shovels to muffle noise and leaving the deceased's clothes neatly folded to avoid theft charges. Some bribed gravediggers for burial schedules, while others employed body snatchers' hooks, long poles with curved ends to yank corpses from shallow graves without descending into the pit. The best could empty a coffin in under 15 minutes, replacing disturbed soil with such care that families often never suspected the violation. London's notorious Burke and Hare even skipped the graveyard entirely, creating fresh inventory through murder when demand outpaced supply. What's startling is how openly this criminal trade fueled legitimate science. Surgeons often waited in nearby carriages to receive still warm cadavers, paying premium prices for unblemished specimens. Medical students joked about resurrectionists in lectures, while professors discreetly recommended reliable suppliers. The dichotomy was stark. These stolen bodies allowed pioneers like John Hunter to map the human nervous system and William Harvey to prove blood circulation breakthroughs that saved countless lives. The ethical shadows stretched far. Resurrectionists disproportionately targeted the poor, whose flimsy wooden coffins were easier to breach than the iron-reinforced vaults of the wealthy. The public's horror led to watch societies patrolling cemeteries with spring guns and Mortsafe's heavy iron cages bolted over fresh graves, yet even these couldn't stop the determined. In one infamous case, Glasgow resurrectionists tunneled into a crypt for weeks, removing corpses brick by brick to avoid detection. The legacy of this macabre trade still pulses through modern medicine. Public outrage over body snatching directly led to anatomy laws legalizing cadaver donations, a system we still use today. Those grisly midnight excavations forced society to confront an uncomfortable truth. Medical progress often walks hand in hand with moral ambiguity. So next time you see an organ donor card, remember the resurrectionists. Their dark, dirty work helped build a world where such gifts are given freely, not stolen in the dead of night. The silence of midnight was shattered by a voice that sent shivers through even the bravest souls, the slow, mournful cadence of the Crier of the Dead, walking his solitary rounds through plague-blackened streets. Unlike the cheerful town crier who heralded news by day, this figure emerged only after curfew, his lantern casting long shadows as he recited names of the newly departed. Each announcement ended with the same chilling refrain, "Pray for them tonight, for tomorrow it may be you." This wasn't just a grim public service, it was psychological triage for communities drowning in loss. During outbreaks like the Black Death, mass graves made individual funerals impossible, leaving families without closure. The Crier's nightly roll call became a sacred substitute, ensuring no life faded unnoticed. In Florence, records describe criers pausing at certain homes to recite entire family lineages, turning lists into impromptu eulogies. Some even carried small bells, their tolls matching the rhythm of recited names, a sound that came to define urban life during epidemics. What's rarely acknowledged is how these criers doubled as early public health workers. Their routes often followed infection patterns, indirectly mapping outbreaks before anyone understood contagion. By noting which houses had multiple deaths, they helped authorities identify quarantine zones. Their chants also served practical purposes, reminding survivors to burn contaminated bedding or air out rooms, folk wisdom that actually slowed disease spread. The role demanded extraordinary emotional labor. Criers witnessed grief in its rawest form, from mothers wailing at their mention to widows pressing coins into their hands for extra prayers. Some developed coded systems. A longer pause between names might signal a child's death, sparing parents the bluntness of the announcement. In York, one Crier's journal reveals he secretly added his own daughter to the list weeks after her passing, unable to voice it until then. Their legacy lingers in unexpected ways. Modern memorials like the AIDS quilt or pandemic bell-ringing ceremonies echo their blend of naming and collective mourning. Even our moment of silence traditions trace back to their pauses between names. The Crier of the Dead understood something we often forget, that in the face of unimaginable loss, the simple act of speaking a name aloud can be the first stitch in a community's healing. Imagine waking up to find your prize pig missing, not stolen, but legally locked away in a medieval version of animal jail, with a grumpy official demanding payment for its release. This was the daily reality enforced by the Pinder, a figure as much feared by forgetful farmers as any tax collector. Armed with a stout wooden staff and an encyclopedic knowledge of local livestock brands, these officers patrolled village borders and common lands, ready to pound any wandering cow, sheep, or goose that strayed from its rightful grazing area. Their stone-walled enclosures, known as pounds, weren't just holding pens, they were economic weapons ensuring order in communities where a single loose animal could destroy an entire season's crops. The Pinders' authority went far beyond rounding up strays. They acted as living databases of ownership, recognizing which three-legged hen belonged to Widow Miller or which scarred bull was the property of the blacksmith's son. In towns like Nottingham, court records show Pinders testifying in disputes over trampled fields, their word carrying the weight of sworn evidence. Some even kept detailed ledgers, noting how long each creature was impounded and what foods it consumed, charging owners not just for the fine, but for hay and water provided during their animals' incarceration. What's fascinating is how this system shaped language we still use today. The term impound comes directly from these medieval animal jails, while phrases like pound foolish originated from criticisms of owners who'd rather let livestock rot in custody than pay fees. Even modern dog pounds echo the Pinder's blend of custody and redemption, but the role also reflected deeper social structures. In an era without formal police forces, Pinders were often elected by villagers trusted to be firm but fair. Their pounds doubled as community hubs where neighbors might barter for a mistakenly captured goat or negotiate shared grazing rights under the Pinders' mediation. The Pinders' legacy proves how everyday necessities breed innovation. Before zoning laws or insurance claims, these animal enforcers maintained order through a simple principle: disrupt the commons, and your property becomes collateral. Their story lives on every time a parking ticket references impound fees, a direct descendant of medieval hoof justice. So next time you see a stray dog in a pound, remember the Pinders who turned chaos into system, one wayward pig at a time. In the bustling markets of medieval Europe, where most footwear was clunky and practical, one craftsman's shop stood apart, its shelves lined with sleek, butter-soft shoes that gleamed like polished wine. This was the domain of the Cordwainer, the luxury shoemaker whose creations weren't just worn but flaunted, turning feet into status symbols. While cobblers patched up old boots for peasants, Cordwainers worked exclusively with cordovan, a prized leather from Moorish Spain so supple it was said to mold to the foot like a second skin. Their guilds guarded their secrets fiercely, requiring 7-year apprenticeships and fining members who used inferior materials or dared to repair shoes, a cobbler's offense. A single pair could cost as much as a farmer's monthly wages, but for nobles and merchants, the price was worth it. The Cordwainer's workshop was a marvel of specialization. One artisan cut patterns with knives so sharp they could slice parchment-thin leather, while another stitched seams with needles finer than a lady's hairpin. The most skilled mastered the poulain, those absurdly pointed shoes favored by fashion-conscious elites. Records from 14th century London describe cordwainers inserting whalebone into toes to keep them erect or dyeing leather with crushed Kermes insects to achieve a crimson so vivid it shocked the church into declaring the color sinful. Every step of production was regulated. Guild inspectors would slash subpar shoes in half publicly, a warning against shoddy craftsmanship. What's fascinating isn't just their artistry, but their influence on medieval society. Cordwainers became accidental power brokers. When the English crown needed loans, it turned to their wealthy guilds. Their designs even sparked laws. King Edward IV once banned anyone below the rank of lord from wearing poulaines longer than 2 inches, turning footwear into a literal measure of social hierarchy. Modern luxury brands owe them more than they'd admit. That exclusive, made-by-hand label, Cordwainers invented the concept, stamping their personal marks inside each shoe centuries before Louis Vuitton monograms. The Cordwainers' legacy walks among us today. Their guild system inspired modern apprenticeships, and their emphasis on materials over mass production foreshadowed the slow fashion movement. Next time you admire a pair of hand-stitched Italian loafers, remember the medieval artisans who proved that even something as everyday as a shoe could be a masterpiece if you're willing to pay for the souls of royalty. In the bustling textile markets of medieval England, where fortunes were made on the backs of sheep and looms, one official stamp could mean the difference between profit and ruin. The Alnager didn't just measure cloth, he controlled the lifeblood of entire economies, wielding his lead seals like a king's own signature. Picture a man moving methodically through market stalls, his wooden yardstick tapping bolts of wool like a judge's gavel, his eyes scrutinizing every thread for imperfections. This wasn't just quality control, it was a high-stakes game where taxes, trade, and national identity collided. The Alnager's tools were simple, but his power immense. Each piece of woolen cloth had to meet strict standards before receiving his official seal, a lead disc pressed into the fabric's edge, often stamped with royal insignia. These weren't mere decorations, they were medieval barcodes certifying everything from fiber content to dimensional accuracy. A missing or counterfeit seal could land a merchant in the pillory, while a flawless inspection meant access to lucrative foreign markets. The best Alnagers developed almost supernatural senses, able to detect shoddy weaving by touch or spot fraudulent blends by how dyes absorbed into fibers. What's startling is how this bureaucratic role shaped geopolitics. England's wealth rode on wool exports, and Alnagers essentially functioned as treasury agents. Their collected taxes funded wars, and crowned kings Edward III famously used wool revenues to bankroll his campaigns in France, but their influence went deeper. By enforcing consistent quality, they built England's reputation as the source of Europe's finest cloth. Venetian merchants would pay premiums for Alnager sealed wool, knowing it wouldn't shrink or unravel like cheaper imitations. The system wasn't without its dark side. Corrupt Alnagers took bribes to overlook flaws, while others deliberately downgraded quality to extort higher re-inspection fees. In one notorious case from 14th century Norwich, an Alnager's fraudulent seals flooded the market with substandard cloth, nearly collapsing the local industry until weavers revolted and burned his office to the ground. The Crown responded by making seal tampering a treasonous offense, proof of how seriously these wool inspectors were taken, yet their legacy endures in surprising ways. Modern textile labeling laws trace directly back to Alnager seals, and the concept of government-certified quality control was perfected in their workshops. Even today's Made in England tag carries echoes of that medieval stamp of approval, so the next time you check a clothing label for fabric content, Remember the Alnagers, the original guardians of truth in textiles, who proved that even something as humble as wool could weave the fabric of empires. The Warfinger stood at the edge of the known world, where creaking ships disgorged silks from China, spices from India, and ivory from Africa onto rain-slicked docks. More than just a harbor master, this was the medieval equivalent of a customs officer, logistics manager, and international arbitrator rolled into one. While knights and kings dominated history books, it was Warfingers who kept the lifeblood of commerce flowing through Europe's veins. Their daily logs, scrawled in meticulous Latin or vernacular script, became the original tracking numbers, documenting every barrel of Bordeaux wine, every bale of Flemish wool that passed through their domain. What set these officials apart wasn't just their organizational skills, but their almost diplomatic authority. When Venetian galleys clashed with Hanseatic traders over docking rights, the Warfinger settled disputes with the finality of a judge. Their scales determined tariff fees based on cargo weight and origin, with rates as carefully negotiated as modern trade agreements. In London's bustling Billingsgate, Warfingers even issued early versions of receipts, wax-sealed documents certifying a shipment's contents and taxes paid, that merchants could present hundreds of miles inland as proof of ownership. The real magic lay in their record systems, using parchment rolls that sometimes stretched longer than the ships themselves. Warfingers tracked tides, cargo manifests, and even crew health statuses. Some ports developed color-coded tallies, red ink for high-value goods like saffron, black for bulk commodities like grain. These weren't just administrative tools, they were early risk management systems. A Warfinger in Genoa could glance at his records and know which returning vessels were overdue, triggering insurance protocols that foreshadowed modern maritime law. Their influence stretched far beyond the waterfront. Warfingers' ledgers became critical intelligence during wars, revealing which kingdoms were stockpiling timber for warships or importing extra salt for preserving army rations. When the English crown needed to embargo wool exports to pressure Flanders, it was the Warfingers who enforced the blockade, confiscating contraband and jailing smugglers. Yet they also facilitated cultural exchange. Many Warfingers spoke multiple languages, acting as interpreters for foreign merchants and inadvertently spreading ideas along with goods. The Warfingers' legacy anchors our modern world more than we realize. Their cargo tracking evolved into today's global shipping container systems, while their tariff collections laid groundwork for international customs agencies. Next time you receive a package with a barcode, remember those medieval dock managers who proved that civilization advances not just through conquests, but through the quiet, careful work of those who keep trade moving. In the manicured gardens of 18th century England, where aristocrats competed to create the most picturesque landscapes, one peculiar figure became the ultimate status symbol, not a rare statue or exotic plant, but a living, breathing human hermit. These weren't spiritual seekers drawn to solitude. They were professional eremites hired by wealthy landowners to inhabit purpose-built hermitages on their estates, praying for the family's salvation while providing a dash of Gothic ambience. Imagine signing a contract that required you to stop bathing, grow your nails into talons, and remain silent for 7 years, all while tourists gawked at you through faux ruined windows. This was performance art meets eternal salvation, with wages paid in ale and mutton. The job description read like something from a surrealist play. Advertisements for ornamental hermits specified everything from beard length, not less than 12 inches, to preferred modes of dramatic sighing. Some contracts banned speaking entirely, while others demanded hermits compose melancholy poetry on demand for visiting guests. Lord Orford's hermit at Strawberry Hill was required to wear a druid-like robe and strategically appear at twilight. while the one employed by the Earl of Shrewsbury lived in a cave with an hourglass and skull for props. The more authentically wretched the hermit looked, the better it reflected the patron's refined taste, a twisted form of spiritual cosplay where poverty became a fashionable accessory. Beneath the absurdity lay a fascinating collision of faith and commerce. Medieval Christianity had revered genuine hermits as holy figures, but the Enlightenment turned them into living garden ornaments. Wealthy landowners, uncomfortable with their own lavish lifestyles, sought to buy piety through these human proxies. The irony, many so-called hermits were actually unemployed laborers or retired soldiers desperate for room and board. Parish records reveal some secretly sneaked off to taverns, while others demanded raises after their beards reached impressive lengths. One particularly entrepreneurial hermit in Wales charged visitors extra to hear his prophecies, which he cribbed from old almanacs. The practice's legacy lingers in our obsession with curated authenticity. Modern glamping sites with rustic cabins or influencers staging off-grid retreats echo that same desire to aestheticize simplicity. Even the Marie Antoinette-style fantasy of playing peasant has roots in these theatrical hermits. Their story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. When spirituality becomes a status symbol, even solitude has a price tag. The next time you see a garden folly designed to look like a crumbling hermitage, remember the real people who proved that in the right light, and with the right contract, holiness could be just another gig. Behind the thick stone walls of medieval castles, where whispers of treason could topple kingdoms, one craftsman held the power to make state secrets vanish or reappear with the turn of a key. The royal locksmith wasn't just a metalworker, he was a sworn guardian of trust, blending the precision of a watchmaker with the cunning of a spy. While blacksmiths forged swords for glorious battles, these artisans waged a quieter war against deception, crafting mechanisms so devious they'd make modern safe-crackers weep. A single lock from their workshops could contain more moving parts than a cathedral's clock, each one a tiny sentry standing between order and chaos. Take the infamous King's Secret lock commissioned by Henry VIII, a masterpiece of misdirection. Its face displayed 3 keyholes, but only one opened the mechanism. Inserting a key into the wrong hole triggered hidden pins that jammed the lock permanently, while the true keyhole was concealed behind a sliding panel engraved with Tudor roses. Even more ingenious were the thief traps, locks designed to capture intruders' tools. Some had spring-loaded jaws that snapped shut on lockpicks, while others released clouds of soot or dye to mark the culprit. The best royal locksmiths signed their work with subtle engravings, like the German artisan who hid his initials inside a lock's mechanism, visible only when the bolt was halfway turned. But these devices weren't just about brute security, they were psychological warfare. Locksmiths exploited thieves' superstitions by crafting keyholes shaped like demonic faces or embedding cursed inscriptions warning of divine retribution. One surviving French chest lock bears the chilling promise, "My teeth bite the hand that feeds them." Royals understood that the illusion of impenetrability was often as effective as the reality. When Elizabeth I's locksmith created a box that required 2 keys turned simultaneously, one held by the Queen, the other by her treasurer, it wasn't just a technical feat. It was a political statement about shared power. The true test of a royal locksmith's skill came during sieges or succession crises. Records from the Tower of London describe locks that took 3 days to open even with the correct key, their mechanisms requiring precise sequences of turns and pauses. Some could only be operated at certain temperatures, their brass components engineered to expand or contract with castle hall drafts. The most valuable locksmiths traveled with monarchs, their toolkits including skeleton keys that could bypass lesser locks but would self-destruct if forced into royal mechanisms. What's astonishing is how these medieval innovations echo in today's security systems. The concept of two-factor authentication. Royal locksmiths were there first with their dual key designs. Modern vaults with time delay features, they're spiritual descendants of those deliberately sluggish tower mechanisms. Even biometric scans find their roots in 14th century Venetian locks that recognized not just keys, but the unique pressure of their owner's grip. The next time you tap in a smartphone passcode, remember the locksmiths who proved that true security isn't about building stronger walls, but about outthinking the minds that seek to breach them. Their legacy reminds us that in the arms race between protectors and intruders, creativity has always been the ultimate lockpick. The cobblestone streets of a medieval market day erupted in gasps and cheers as a hulking shadow lumbered into view, not a monster, but a dancing bear, its massive paws shuffling to the rhythm of a tambourine played by its beaming master. The Bearward was more than just an entertainer. He was a one-man traveling circus, bringing wonders from distant lands to villagers who might never see beyond their own fields. With bears trained to wrestle on command, monkeys in tiny doublets collecting coins, and dogs that could walk tightropes, these performers turned town squares into stages where the line between human and beast blurred in the most delightful way. Training these animals required equal parts patience and bravery. Historical accounts describe Bearwards spending years with their charges, using food rewards and repetitive drills to teach tricks like rolling barrels or playing dead. Some even conditioned bears to embrace handlers on cue, a heart-stopping act that never failed to thrill crowds. But the real secret wasn't brute force. It was understanding animal behavior in ways that predated modern zoology. A skilled Bearward could read a bear's mood by the twitch of its ears or the pitch of its growls, avoiding disasters before they happened. Their knowledge often made them unofficial veterinarians too, with peasants bringing sick livestock for the Bearward's mysterious animal cures between performances. Behind the spectacle lay a darker reality. Church records bristle with condemnations of Bearwards as immoral influences, accusing them of everything from witchcraft to corrupting public morals. Puritan preachers claimed the bear's gyrations inspired sinful dancing, while town councils worried about public safety. Yet these criticisms often hid hypocrisy. The same nobles who funded bear-baiting pits as noble sport would publicly scorn the Bearwards' humane performances. Some Bearwards cleverly sidestepped bans by rebranding their shows as educational, claiming they taught biblical lessons about man's dominion over beasts. The Bearwards' legacy prowls through modern entertainment in unexpected ways. Traveling animal acts evolved into circuses, while the dynamic between trainer and crowd presaged reality TV's staged dramas. Even viral videos of pets doing tricks carry echoes of those medieval market squares. What's often forgotten is how Bearwards humanized wild creatures centuries before conservation movements. Their shows, flawed as they were by today's standards, gave ordinary people their first glimpse of nature's majesty, planting seeds of wonder that would eventually grow into our modern love for the animal kingdom. While the Gong Farmer tackled castle cesspits under cover of darkness, his lesser-known counterpart worked daylight hours in even more treacherous conditions. The cesspit emptier, the unsung sanitation engineer of private homes. Picture squeezing through a narrow cellar hatch into an airless brick chamber, your lantern revealing a waist-high stew of human waste fermenting for months, its ammonia fumes searing your lungs. This was the daily reality for these specialists, who navigated labyrinthine tunnels beneath row houses with nothing but a shovel, a bucket, and a prayer that the rotting wooden supports overhead wouldn't collapse. Their work required a macabre expertise. Seasoned emptiers could judge a pit's toxicity by the color of its crust. A pearlescent sheen signaled dangerous methane buildup, and knew which neighborhoods hired cheaper laborers to dump waste illegally in rivers, contaminating drinking water downstream. The smartest carried caged canaries. If the bird collapsed, the air wasn't fit for humans either. In cities like London, where the Great Stink of 1858 would later paralyze Parliament, these workers were the only barrier between order and epidemic. The cesspit emptier's true innovation was in recycling what others feared to touch. Night soil, the era's polite term for human waste, became coveted fertilizer for outlying farms. Emptiers negotiated contracts with rural landowners, creating a supply chain that turned urban filth into agricultural gold. Some even sold particularly ripe batches to gunpowder manufacturers, where potassium-rich waste was used in saltpeter production. This circular economy kept cities functioning long before modern sewage systems, though the risks were astronomical. Records from 17th century Edinburgh tell of an emptier named Fergus MacLeod who suffocated in a collapsed pit. His body recovered only after neighbors complained of the smell, a grim irony that underscored the job's lethal stakes. Yet without these volunteers, medieval cities would have drowned in their own filth. Their legacy flows beneath our feet today, in every sewer main and public health ordinance that prioritizes sanitation over stigma. When we flush a toilet without a second thought, we inherit the hard-won victories of those who worked where no one else would. Deep in the dappled shadows of medieval woodlands, where the scent of pine and damp earth hung thick in the air, a lone figure moved silently between ancient oaks, the woodward, the lawman of the forest. Armed with nothing but a horn to summon help and an encyclopedic knowledge of timber marks, this was no ordinary gamekeeper. Appointed directly by the crown or local lords, woodwards wielded authority that could ruin a peasant with a single fine or spare a nobleman's prized hunting grounds from devastation. Their role went far beyond patrolling. They were medieval ecologists, balancing human need against nature's delicate limits in ways we're only now rediscovering. Every twig snapped underfoot told a story to a seasoned woodward. They could spot the difference between a wind-fallen branch and one illegally chopped by the gleam of an axe mark. Some memorized hundreds of property boundaries known as bounds, marked by notches on trees or standing stones, settling disputes between villages with the finality of a high court judge. Their most vital duty, enforcing forest law, a complex web of royal decrees that dictated who could hunt squirrels with bows, gather fallen wood, or even keep dogs near certain woods. Violators faced brutal penalties, fines that amounted to a year's wages, imprisonment, or in extreme cases, losing a hand for repeat poachers. What's fascinating is how scientifically advanced their conservation methods were. Woodwards implemented seasonal bans on hunting deer during fawning periods and restricted tree felling when sap rose in spring, ensuring regrowth. In Sherwood Forest, records show they tagged mature oaks with lead seals to mark them as naval timber, future ships' masts protected from local use. Some even practiced early controlled burns to manage undergrowth, a technique modern foresters still employ. Their work wasn't just about preservation, it was sustainable resource management centuries before the term existed. The social dynamics reveal even more. Wealthy lords prized skilled woodwards, offering them cottages and exemptions from taxes, but the job came with dangers. Poachers desperate to feed families often set traps for watchmen, while corrupt officials sometimes conspired with loggers for bribes. One surviving letter from 14th century Yorkshire complains of a woodward found drowned, his pockets stuffed with illicit payments. Yet many took pride in their role. Court documents describe some refusing noble orders to overharvest, knowing it would doom the forest for generations. Their legacy thrives in unexpected places. Modern park rangers and wildlife officers inherit their dual role as educators and enforcers. Even the concept of protected old-growth forests echoes the woodward's sacred groves. Next time you walk through a national park with carefully marked trails, remember these medieval guardians who proved that protecting nature isn't just about laws. It's about understanding the whisper of leaves and the secret language of the wild. Imagine a knock at your door that carried the weight of eternal damnation, not from a priest bearing blessings, but from the summoner, the medieval church's most feared bureaucrat. Clad in robes stitched with legal insignia and clutching a ledger of sins real or invented, these officers didn't just deliver court summons, they wielded spiritual terror as a weapon. Their job was simple in theory: notify individuals to appear before ecclesiastical courts for offenses ranging from adultery to heresy. In practice, they operated like holy bounty hunters, their power stretching far beyond parchment and ink into the darkest corners of medieval conscience. What made summoners so terrifying was their dual role as accuser and enforcer. Unlike secular bailiffs, they answered only to church law, which claimed jurisdiction over souls rather than just bodies. A summoner could drag you to court for moral crimes. No civil authority would touch blasphemy, gossip, even skipping Sunday Mass. Their records from York in the 14th century reveal cases where entire families were cited for excessive laughter during Lent, or a baker fined for selling bread with too little piety. But here's where the system curdled. Summoners often pocketed bribes to lose charges, extorting villagers by threatening to escalate minor infractions into hellfire-worthy indictments. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales immortalized their corruption through the character of a summoner whose face was fire-red and pimpled, a man who knew every board and tavern in town better than his psalms. Yet behind the satire lay a grim truth. Summoners held very real power. Ecclesiastical courts could impose penances that bankrupted families, like ordering pilgrimage journeys costing years of wages. Some summoners even partnered with local prostitutes, splitting fees for turning in clients on morals charges. The church turned a blind eye because their cut kept cathedral coffers full. Their legacy twists through modern legal systems in unexpected ways. The concept of subpoenas, direct descendant of the summoner's scroll, the tension between spiritual and secular law. Their battles over jurisdiction foreshadowed church-state conflicts still raging today. Even the stereotype of the shady process server traces back to these medieval figures who proved that when authority mixes with temptation, corruption often follows. The next time you hear someone joke about avoiding the subpoena like the plague, remember the summoners, the original masters of holy intimidation, who showed that sometimes the scariest threats come stamped with a cross. The dusty roads of medieval Europe teemed with travelers of every sort, but few stirred as much hope and suspicion as the pardoner, a charismatic figure draped in relics, his saddlebags stuffed with parchment promises of salvation. For a handful of coins, he offered what no priest could guarantee: a signed indulgence shortening your time in purgatory, sometimes by centuries. These weren't just spiritual receipts, they were emotional lifelines for peasants who feared their loved ones languished in the flames of the afterlife. With a flourish of his seal, the pardoner could declare a soul's suffering reduced from 1,000 years to a mere 100, a transaction that blurred the line between divine mercy and holy commerce. What made this system so explosive wasn't just the theology, it was the theater. Pardoners perfected the art of the medieval sales pitch, staging elaborate shows with holy relics like fragments of the true cross or vials of the Virgin's tears. Records describe one particularly brazen pardoner in 15th century Germany who claimed his donkey's bridle had touched Christ's manger, offering indulgences to those who kissed it. Others staged mock trials where audience members played jurors deciding their own sin's severity before being urged to purchase forgiveness. The most successful traveled with choirs to perform mournful hymns about purgatory's torments, reducing crowds to tears and opening their purses. Behind the spectacle lay a complex financial engine. Indulgence sales funded everything from cathedral construction to crusades, with the Vatican taking a cut of every transaction. When Pope Leo X needed funds to rebuild St. Peter's Basilica, he authorized a massive indulgence campaign across Germany, but the system had loopholes big enough to drive a cart through. Ambitious pardoners often pocketed profits or sold forged documents. One notorious case involved a pardoner in York who recycled the same indulgence for different customers by simply changing the names. The backlash was inevitable. Reformers like Martin Luther raged against pardoners who made salvation seem like a tavern tab to be settled with coins rather than contrition. Yet for all their corruption, pardoners revealed something profound about medieval spirituality. Their parchments gave tangible form to an abstract doctrine, offering comfort to those who couldn't read scripture but understood the weight of a signed seal. Even the poorest families scraped together pennies for indulgences, not because they were gullible, but because the alternative, eternal uncertainty, was too terrible to bear. Modern parallels abound, from televangelists selling miracle cures to self-help gurus peddling enlightenment in weekend seminars. The human longing for quick fixes to life's deepest anxieties hasn't changed. The next time you see a late-night infomercial promising transformation for 3 easy payments, remember the pardoners who proved that hope and the willingness to pay for it is as old as time. Their story forces us to ask, when does faith become a commodity, and who gets to set the price? A gleaming razor flashed in the dim light of a medieval barber shop, but this wasn't just for trimming beards. With the same steady hand that sculpted a nobleman's mustache, the barber surgeon could lance a boil, extract a tooth, or even amputate a gangrenous limb. These red and white striped poles outside their shops weren't just signage, they symbolized the dual nature of their trade. The white stood for bandages, the red for blood, a fitting emblem for men who straddled the line between grooming and butchery, their tools switching from scissors to scalpels between customers. What set barber surgeons apart was their brutal pragmatism. While university-trained physicians debated humors and stars in Latin, these hands-on healers learned through apprenticeship, tackling everything from battlefield wounds to infected ingrown hairs. Their signature tool, the fleam, was a folding blade that could open veins for bloodletting in the morning and shave chins by afternoon. Monasteries often employed them as medical jack of all trades. Records from St. Bartholomew's in London describe a single barber surgeon who drained abscesses, set broken bones, and gave haircuts to monks on holy days. The real shock wasn't their range, but their accidental contributions to science. Without formal training, barber surgeons pioneered techniques through sheer repetition. They discovered that tight bandaging reduced bleeding long before tourniquets were understood, and their experience with razor-sharp instruments made them unexpectedly skilled at delicate procedures. One French barber surgeon's journal describes removing cataracts using a needle normally reserved for stitching wounds, a technique still used in modified form today. Yet their legacy is stained with grim irony. The very tools that made them precise, those meticulously honed razors and scissors, became vectors for infection when used on multiple patients without cleaning. Their bustling shops, where a man might get a shave after watching a limb removal, were petri dishes of cross-contamination. It wasn't until the 18th century that medicine finally split the trades, sending barbers back to their mirrors and surgeons to proper medical training. Modern medicine owes them more than we admit. That sterile white coat doctors wear, its origins traced to the barber surgeon's blood-stiffened apron. The precise hand motions of today's microsurgeons echo their razor control. Even the concept of outpatient procedures, quick interventions without lengthy hospitalization, was their invention. So next time you see a spinning barber pole, remember it's more than a relic. It's a monument to the messy, bloody cradle where modern healing began, proof that sometimes progress comes not from pristine labs, but from the steady hands of those willing to do what others wouldn't. Beneath the jingling bells and garish motley of the medieval court jester lay a razor-sharp mind, one of the few in the kingdom that could mock the king's policies to his face and live to tell the tale. These weren't just fools hired for cheap laughs, they were political satirists with diplomatic immunity, their cap and bells costumes serving as both disguise and armor. While nobles bowed and flattered, the jester's job was to hold up a distorted mirror to power, wrapping uncomfortable truths in riddles and rhymes that could make even tyrants pause mid-tirade. Records from the court of Henry VIII describe his jester Will Somers interrupting royal tantrums with a well-timed joke about how even Solomon's wisdom couldn't fix a crown shoved too far up one's. Well, you get the idea. What set jesters apart was their unique legal status. The tradition of jesting privilege dated back to ancient Rome, granting licensed fools the right to criticize rulers without punishment, a medieval precursor to parliamentary immunity. Some monarchs took this further. Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I issued his Jesterkunst von der Rosen, a written decree allowing him to speak truths no other man dare utter. The most cunning jesters weaponized this freedom, using nursery rhymes to expose corrupt ministers or puppet shows to lampoon failed military campaigns. In 15th century Burgundy, Jester Tribulet reportedly stopped a war by staging a skit where two costumed dogs, labeled France and Burgundy, mauled each other over a bone while the real dukes watched in uneasy silence. But the job wasn't all subversive wit. Jesters doubled as psychological barometers for their rulers. A king's tolerance for mockery often signaled his grip on power. Weak monarchs banned jokes at their expense, while secure ones let jesters roast them publicly. When Richard the Lionheart's jester teased him about losing to Saladin, the king laughed and rewarded him. A century later, Edward II had his jester hanged for a similar quip about military incompetence. The difference: Richard knew his throne was safe, Edward didn't. The best jesters mastered a dangerous balancing act, pushing boundaries without crossing them. Their toolkit included fool's license, phrases like "only a fool would say" to preface risky comments, or singing criticisms in falsetto to soften the blow. Some employed coded language. The French term folie meant both foolishness and a type of fortified tower, letting jesters imply a ruler's mind needed equal protection. Their costumes were tactical too. Those oversized marotte scepters often concealed knives for self-defense, while the traditional ass-eared cap symbolized that even kings had blind spots worth pointing out. Their legacy tumbles through modern satire in unexpected ways. From political cartoons to late-night comedy shows, today's jesters still wield humor as a check on power. The White House Correspondents' Dinner, where presidents endure roasts from comedians, might as well be a Renaissance festival tribute act. Even the concept of speaking truth to power owes its cultural staying power to those medieval fools who proved that sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't a sword thrust but a perfectly timed punchline. The next time you laugh at a leader being skewered on television, remember the court jesters who turned comedy into both shield and scalpel, showing us that laughter can be the ultimate rebellion. Behind every bizarre medieval job title lay a brilliant, if unconventional, solution to the challenges of their time. Take the humble Gong farmer knee-deep in filth beneath castle privies. His revolting work wasn't just about waste removal. It was early epidemiology in action, preventing cholera and dysentery from ripping through crowded cities. Or consider the ale conners whose beer-soaked breeches set quality control standards that paved the way for modern food safety inspections. These weren't just odd jobs. They were ingenious adaptations to a world without germ theory, refrigeration, or centralized governance. The deeper you dig, the more these roles reveal about how societies self-organize. The whipping boy system, cruel as it was, recognized something modern psychology confirms. Witnessing consequences for others can shape behavior more powerfully than personal punishment. Today's corporate accountability partners and peer review systems are distant echoes of that same principle. Even the plague doctor's eerie costume, for all its superstition, represented an early grasp of barrier protection centuries before we understood viruses. Their failures often taught us more than their successes. When Scold's Bridles silenced women rather than addressing legitimate grievances, they became cautionary tales about the dangers of suppressing dissent. What's truly remarkable is how many of these professions evolved into essential modern counterparts. The Alnagers' cloth inspections anticipated standardized manufacturing. The Warfingers' cargo logs foreshadowed global shipping trackers, and the Woodward's conservation practices mirror modern forestry science. Even the Jesters' biting satire lives on in political cartoons and late-night monologues. These medieval innovators proved that necessity doesn't just invent, it improvises, often in ways that seem ridiculous until their brilliance becomes undeniable. Their legacy challenges our assumptions about progress. We might smirk at the sin-eater's ritual bread or the pardoner's forged indulgences, but how different are they from modern wellness influencers selling detox teas or self-help gurus peddling enlightenment seminars? The human desire for quick fixes, whether spiritual, medical, or social, hasn't changed. Only the packaging has. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies in their humility. These workers didn't set out to be remembered. They solved immediate problems with the tools they had. Yet centuries later, their makeshift solutions illuminate the universal truth that every society runs on the backs of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, whether they're armed with leeches and lanterns or keyboards and lab coats. The next time you encounter an obscure job title, look beyond the strangeness. You might just find the seeds of something revolutionary. From Gong farmers knee-deep in castle cesspits to jesters whispering uncomfortable truths in royal ears, medieval society thrived on roles that seem absurd today until you recognize the ingenuity behind them. These weren't just odd jobs, they were the duct tape and WD-40 of their era, holding together the fragile machinery of daily life with solutions that were equal parts bizarre and brilliant. Take the ale conner's beer-soaked trousers or the resurrectionist's moonlit grave robbing. What looks like madness to us was meticulous problem-solving when faced with challenges like food safety or medical education. The deeper lesson here, human creativity flourishes under constraints. Without modern technology or scientific understanding, medieval people improvised with whatever they had. Urine became a cleaning agent, bear dances became entertainment, and locked chests became psychological warfare. Some solutions were flawed. We've thankfully retired the Scold's bridle, but others, like the Woodward's sustainable forestry or the Warfingers' cargo tracking, were ahead of their time. These roles prove that innovation isn't always about grand inventions. Sometimes it's about the quiet, dirty work of adapting to the world as you find it. What's truly humbling is how many of these professions echo in our lives today. That barber surgeon wielding a razor and a scalpel, he's the ancestor of both your hairstylist and your dermatologist. The pardoner selling spiritual peace of mind, Scroll through any social media feed, and you'll find his modern counterparts peddling enlightenment in 30-day courses. Even the sin-eater's burden, bearing others' guilt for a price, resonates in everything from therapy sessions to corporate scapegoating. So the next time you complain about your job, spare a thought for the medieval worker who spent his days collecting leeches or dodging methane explosions in sewer pits. Their stories remind us that every era has its ungrateful tasks and that today's weird job might be tomorrow's indispensable profession. Which of these roles shocked, amused, or impressed you the most? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments, and if you enjoyed this dive into history's strangest careers, hit that subscribe button for more untold stories from the past. After all, as the Jesters taught us, sometimes the deepest truths come dressed in laughter,